Matthew T. Price is a director who grew up terrified of horror films. When he was very young, his father suffered a heart attack while playing basketball with his older sister and was rushed to the hospital. His father thankfully survived, but he had to spend some time in the hospital to recover. One day, Price's mother wanted to spend some time alone with her husband, so she asked her oldest daughter to take her siblings to the movies. There were 5 kids with a 12-year age gap between them, so deciding on a film wasn't easy. His sister settled on a Christmas movie about these cute little creatures that looked like something that would be okay for all of them to watch. Gremlins. This absolutely traumatized Matthew. For years after that, he was a complete chicken, avoiding horror movies or anything even remotely horror adjacent. He wouldn't go into the horror section of the video store because the box art freaked him out. Then, while he was in high school, he met his match. He had a crush on a girl who was obsessed with the movie Scream. One day they were hanging out, she wanted to see it for the 100th time, so he sucked it up and watched it with her. He went in hoping they would do something else besides watch the movie, but then something unexpected happened to him. He watched the movie and loved it. Since Scream was a satirical horror film, it made him want to investigate all the tropes that often filled all sorts of movies. This awakened something else in him too, a desire to look further into how movies were made. Scream had homages and parodies within it, so he watched as many as he could find to spot all the references. All the big ones: A Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Friday the 13th, and so on. When he watched The Evil Dead, he was happy to discover that Sam Raimi was also from Michigan. Learning about these movies made him want to take that path himself. He decided his career goal was to be a filmmaker. After high school, he was accepted into USC, which was very expensive. Unfortunately, his parents couldn't afford the tuition. They told him the only way he could go was if he earned enough scholarships to make it as cheap as an in-state tuition at the University of Michigan. They were all surprised when he did just that. While in film school, he watched tons of movies, both in class and in his own personal time. He worked in the film school archives, which were housed in the basement of the Norris Cinema Theater. Up until that point, records of student films were kept on paper. His job was to watch every single student film from the 1960s to the present and catalog them in the computer. He watched countless student films, everything from George Lucas to Rian Johnson. He also had a job at the school's sound stages, working for a guy who had been in the industry so long, he personally knew Walt Disney. The professors at USC tried to indoctrinate him into the cult of the auteur, but his boss showed him the ropes of working below the line. "Don't trust your professors," he said. "The only reason they're here is because they're too old to hack it anymore. Or if they're young, they couldn't hack it in the first place." What about you? Are you kidding? I'm definitely too old. While going to school, he did discover one of his professors who actually knew his stuff, Bob Brown. Robert Latham Brown was a production manager and producer who worked on everything from Return of the Jedi to Hollow Man. He taught a class called Production Planning, in which the director learned so much about the actual physical process of making a film. It wasn't the filler discussed in film theory classes. He taught them who everyone was on set, what they do, and why it's important. All the practical information you'd need to properly run a production. Brown quite literally wrote the book on production planning. He was also the unit production manager for the Spider-Man reshoots at the time, and brought Price on set for a day. It was the first time he had ever been on a soundstage, and he got to meet everyone in the crew, including Raimi. It was one of his fondest memories from film school. After graduating, he worked in TV for years as a PA and production secretary. He did that for a while, and finally started looking into writing and directing his own independent horror film. He was trying to figure out what to focus on, so he turned to one of the masters of horror, Stephen King. In his book, Danse Macabre, King talks about the 3 classic monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. That gave Price an idea. He wanted to make a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of story, since that hadn't been done in a while. Originally, he wrote a script that was about scientists making a formula that unlocks your id, but it seemed kind of dated. At the same time he was developing that, he shot a commercial for some former roommates who had a startup company in San Francisco. The location was really nice looking, so he asked if he could borrow the location to shoot a movie sometime. They figured it would be a tiny short film like the kinds they used to make back in film school, not a feature. Regardless, they said yes. Locations are generally the biggest single line item in the budget, so the access to a free, nice location that didn't require much set dressing was fantastic. This would save the production a big chunk of money. Seeing the location, Price had the idea to change the concept from mad science to a killer app, something that was a little more current. After writing a new draft, he pitched it to some financiers with his friend and producer, Kurt Chatham. They had enough in the budget to get started, so they began looking for a crew. Price reached out to his friend Kelly Moore, who at the time was working at a tech company. She knew that world, but also had connections with filmmakers in the Bay Area who could join the team. Kelly liked the script, but had some notes. And some more notes. And even more notes. Finally, he asked her if she wanted to co-write it with him, and she did. At that point, there was an outline and roughly the first act written. They threw most of that out, but kept the structure. This was all during the summer of 2014. They were planning on filming in the fall and really had to rush. They finished the current draft in about 3 weeks. At that point, the script was about a photography app that automatically touched up your appearance. That didn't really resonate with any of the themes of the film, however. Still, they wanted to keep things moving forward, so they started casting while tweaking the script. The director is not a fan of casting sessions. He hated sitting through auditions, hearing the same lines over and over. What's worse is when someone is obviously bad, he felt rude cutting them off and sending them away. Because of this, they decided to become early adopters of the remote casting process, something that became much more the norm during COVID in 2020, but was far less common in 2014. By having people self-tape, they could skip the bad ones. More importantly, since people could record themselves at their own convenience, they got a wider range of applicants. This allowed for the producers and the director to watch the auditions at their convenience. They made a spreadsheet of all the auditions and voted on their favorites. There were 2 they liked, Leanna Liu and Melanie Friedrich. They auditioned for different parts, but the director noticed they were reading their lines in the same location. In fact, this is how they figured out neither were American. When they auditioned, they had American accents, but when they read the off-screen part for each other, they used their natural accents. British for Leanna, German for Melanie. The director liked their accents, so he asked them to just use their normal voices in the film. Melanie even helped them to add some German lines to the script. Her character was originally American. The rest of the main cast was Lauren Lakis as Devin, Mercedes Manning as Jasmine, Sam Schweikart as Sean, and Carson Nicely as Mike. As this went on, they were brainstorming ideas for a different kind of app. The concept they had now just didn't feel right. Price was playing with the keyboard app on his phone, SwiftKey. It knew everything he'd written in the last 3 years, which was how it was able to predict the next word he was going to use. The 2 writers talked at length about the kind of things you could do with that kind of prediction algorithm, like pairing people with similar interests. The director's wife was walking by at that moment and said, "It sounds like you're talking about a dating app." That instantly clicked, and they knew they had their hook. The moment was so genuine, they transcribed the conversation into a flashback scene in the script where the characters were creating the app. They tried to come up with a title that worked as both a horror movie and a dating app, and settled on A Better Me. While studying under Bob Brown, the most valuable thing the director learned from him was the importance of pre-planning. Because of this, they rehearsed every single scene. He used the shot designer app to create floor plans of the locations and block out every shot for the DP and his crew. That way they knew where everything was going to be at the start of every scene. Since they were on such a tight schedule, they needed to have all the details laid out well in advance to make things go as smoothly as possible. The story was now about a team of programmers who create a new kind of dating app. Instead of having you fill out a form about your likes and dislikes, the app examines your internet history to pair you with someone similar. Unfortunately, the app has some unforeseen side effects. While doing the beta test for it, they discover the users lose all self-control, which makes them become downright evil. This plays into the Jekyll and Hyde aspect of the creation. The characters on the surface appear normal, but underneath the app has mutated them and made them murderers. While writing the script, the 2 writers felt the slasher exploitation genre usually demanded something like a shower scene. Since the movie was about a dating app, the director felt that not having any sex in it would be artistically dishonest. It was a horror film geared toward adults, so there was no reason to avoid nudity for ratings. They didn't want to make a safe PG-13 horror film. The director wanted an R-rated one, like the ones he saw as a teenager. Not wanting to disappoint, they felt the need to include something like that in the film, but didn't want it to just be girl gets naked and takes shower. They challenged themselves to have a shower scene that was interesting, beyond just the nudity. They wrote a scene that had the 2 leads talking about something of substance. They discussed the app and its programming. This made the scene integral to the plot, because it covers the exposition about what exactly the app is and how it works. If the scene was cut, not much within the movie would make sense. Basically, it works on several levels. The obvious exploitational one, exposition. It sets up questions to be explored later, and also develops the characters by showing how comfortable they are with each other. The director wanted the movie to have something for everyone, so he included both male and female nudity. This would lead to a very unexpected problem later. Things then took an unexpected but beneficial turn. The financiers told them they didn't want to give them their money until the new year. They now had 3 extra months on their hands, so they rewrote the script and rehearsed the entire thing with the actors. While the time shift was beneficial since it gave the group more time to fine-tune the production, they lost the actress they had cast for Beth because the new shoot dates created a scheduling conflict. They were able to recast and hired Megan Hui. They changed the title from A Better Me to Other Halves, which they used as the name of the app. In December of 2014, while they were waiting for the money to come in from the financiers, they shot some teaser trailers for their YouTube channel. Filming started in late 2015 on a budget of around $30,000. The majority of the film was shot at the director's friend's startup in San Francisco. The only part of the office that wasn't actually filmed in their building was the shower scene. They shot that in the lockers at Berkeley, through a connection of Kelly Moore's. Since the vast majority of the film was set at night, and because of the nature of the location, they couldn't shoot day for night. With all the windows in the location, that would have been a nightmare. Because of this, they got their day shots out of the way first, and then the rest of the shoot was at night. The fake commercial was shot in the producer's apartment in LA. From day 3 on, they filmed from dusk till dawn, with one exception. There's a scene where the sun comes up and wakes Jasmine and Devin. That was actually shot at sunset, which was mostly because the windows in the office faced west. It was the only way they could get the sun on the horizon in the background. To maximize their footage and coverage, they filmed with 3 and sometimes 4 cameras for most scenes. They were able to get an enormous amount of shots this way. They were also able to create a variety of shots through creative blocking. There was a sequence they called the Dioramas of Death towards the end of the film. That was the only scene shot with a single camera. That took almost half a day for them to set up and shoot. In contrast, most of the dialogue-heavy scenes at the beginning of the movie were shot all on the same day. One day they shot 15 pages. For reference, a typical movie shoots about 2 to 3 pages a day, and a TV show shoots about 7 or 8. Since the story takes place over the course of one night, they needed something to cut away to in order to show the passage of time. That was why they incorporated flashbacks ever since the very first draft. Flashbacks allowed them to flesh out the character's story a bit more and even out the pace. Kelly, the co-writer, has a cameo as the dead girl in the bathtub. Sean, one of the owners of the location, and the director have cameos in the film within a film that the girls are watching. The title of that film, East of the Sun, was the title of the director's first screenplay. The shoot was incredibly short, 10 days. This was largely because the location was only available for 8, and then they spent 2 additional days on locations outside the office. By the end, the director said it was one of the smoothest shoots he'd ever worked on. While editing the film, they ran into a few problems. There was a shot from outside where Sam was writing on the window. They set up a pane of glass inside because there was no way they could hang the camera outside. When the editor reviewed the footage, he noticed the camera in the reflection, something they didn't see at the time. Another was a big problem in post because of a bad decision they made earlier. They thought it'd be easier to make all the computer monitors green and simply replace them with code later on. Turns out, replacing 3 to 4 screens in nearly every shot of the first act was incredibly time-consuming. I talked to a friend of mine who's a professional VFX artist, and he said this is a very common mistake. There were a few other issues, and they had to raise some additional funds to help finish the production. They went to Indiegogo and were able to get enough money to hire some remote visual effects technicians to do the rotoscoping at scale. They then did some reshoots, including the window scene, with the camera better covered and at a slightly lower angle than was originally intended. After editing, they had a test screening with friends and family. The audience said they didn't like the main character. After some discussion, they discovered the audience thought that Jasmine was the main character. This is because with the current cut, the movie begins with Jasmine waking up in the dead guy's apartment. Then they cut to the office, where the rest of the cast was introduced. This was followed by Jasmine and Devin talking in the office, showering, and finally a flashback. They now realized that Jasmine was in every single scene for the first 25 minutes. No wonder the audience was confused. They thought the villain was the main character. To fix this, they took that fake ad for the Other Halves app which was originally never intended to be in the movie, and inserted it in front of the film. They also shot some additional stuff with Devon working out to make sure it was clear that she was the focus. All the workout shots were designed to mirror the shots of Jasmine cleaning up the evidence in the apartment, which is why they fit together seamlessly, even though that wasn't the original plan. The director was a little disappointed that now it clearly telegraphs the fact that Devon will be the final girl, but it's better than having the audience think the villain is meant to be the hero. After the new edit, they took the film to the festival circuit. It played at the Otherworld's Austin Fest and another Hole in the Head in San Francisco. The coolest thing for the director was when the film played at a local filmmaker's spotlight at Celebration Cinema in his hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan. His family and a bunch of old high school friends got to see the movie in a real theater. After that, the film headed to various video-on-demand platforms. Then they hit a roadblock. When the movie was put on Amazon, they placed it behind an age gate. This meant the movie wouldn't show up in a search of Amazon, even Amazon Video. Instead, just above the search results, there was a tiny line of text reading, "Excluding adult and mature items," followed by a link that read, "Show all results." If you know anything about website design, you know that a second click is death. No one clicks a second time when searching for something. No one would accidentally stumble on the film. They had to know the direct link. For an independent movie with no stars, this ruined any chance of finding an audience organically. The director was flabbergasted. He searched Amazon and found hundreds of low-budget horror films with plenty of gore and even more nudity than Other Halves. What was different from this film that made them hide it? He spoke with the distributor, who told him he had to cut the nudity. He told her it was literally impossible. Cutting the shower scene would make the movie incomprehensible. The distributor got really angry with him, saying that he was too concerned with art and not enough with the actual sales of the film. They spoke for about 20 minutes before he realized what she really meant. Turns out it wasn't the female nudity, it was because of the male nudity. Other Halves is a horror movie made for adults, and while the nudity isn't explicit, the male nudity put the film squarely in the X-rated category. They begrudgingly removed the offending shots, a grand total of 7 seconds, and resubmitted the film to Amazon. Amazon then removed the age gate and allowed the film to be found in normal searches, where it was for quite some time. Although now, for some reason, the distributor took the film down. It's still available to rent or buy at the usual locations, but it's no longer available for streaming. The cut didn't render the plot incoherent or undo character motivations, but it doesn't represent the director's vision for the film. He feels the film's now incomplete. They want to play with genre expectations. Sure, there's a naked woman covered in blood, but also a naked man. Equality! The irony of this situation was not lost on them. While striving for equality, they were forced into a double standard in order for the film to be seen at all. They recognize that Amazon's a private business, who has every right to set their own standards for what films they wish to appear on their service. But as customers who subscribe to that service, they were disappointed to learn that Amazon treats male and female nudity differently. Being a small indie film, they couldn't afford for the movie to not appear on one of the biggest streaming platforms in the world, which forced them to self-censor. Other Halves is an interesting little horror film. I think it should be a testament to the power that filmmakers have these days. The tools that used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars are now much more reasonable for indie filmmakers. It'll cost you very little in comparison to filmmaking even a short time ago. Now, that's not an invitation for everybody to make movies. You still need the talent, and most importantly, the drive to make your picture. I think the director and his team showed they have both. Originally, I wasn't going to do a video on this movie. However, after learning what the director went through to get it made, I thought it made for a really interesting story. And the thing about Amazon burying the film made me want to talk about it more. He was able to make a unique film for very, very little. He didn't go nuts with the locations, and kept everything contained to maximize the budget. It's a relatively cheap film that does not look cheap. The movie is flawed, nothing major, just the usual mini budget issues. The biggest problem being that it is very obviously shot on digital. Although, like the rest of the technology, they're starting to figure out ways to make digital look like film, so in a few years, that won't even be an issue. Some scenes did drag a little, and the app making you a killer was a tough sell. I'll give it that it was more believable than Unfriended. Still, I enjoyed the production overall. Also, I was impressed to find out that the film in total only cost about $45,000. There's been other killer app movies that cost way more than this, and I felt they were much, much worse. It should motivate just about anyone who dreams about making their own film, although it should also be a cautionary tale. Making a movie isn't easy, and even if you do get it made, there's a good chance that it won't get noticed, or in the case of something like the Amazon situation, it'll get buried for a reason you weren't even expecting. If you can find it, check it out. It's an interesting twist on the Jekyll and Hyde story, and while yes, it does have its problems, it wasn't anything so glaring that it took me out of it.
I like boobs.
Yeah, he does.